Hey, you're watching Half Asian Tarot Queen. Happy holidays! I'm using the Nightmare Before Christmas deck for the holiday season. Oh my gosh. At the bottom of the deck, when I pulled it out, is the Seven of Needles. I feel like this card has come out for every single reading I've done with this deck so far. It's so crazy. But, I'm doing a reading right now for the full cold moon. It's like starting to gear up for the end of the year. And I like have gone back and like looked at the readings from like the New Year's at the beginning of the year, and it's like really interesting just how much things have come to pass, and also just how you think things are going to go, and then how they actually end up going, and but then how right on it is in the end. It's a cool perspective. So anyways, I'm pulling some cards. I've already pre-pulled some cards from another other decks just to kind of try to make the readings go a little bit faster than they have been, though I don't know that that's actually working. But full moon, full cold moon, the readings from December have been super climactic. It's almost like, we've been kind of stuck in a quagmire for most of 2020, I think most people. And it's almost like things just finally started to move, at the end of the year. And so there's been like a lot of action for the month of December. Okay, I'm gonna pull one more card and then we're gonna go with this. I'm doing a special for the end of the year where I'm doing personal readings. I don't usually do them because I'm just doing this channel for fun, but I have a special link for that down below, and I'm only going to be offering it for a few more days. So just putting that out there. Okay, at the bottom of the deck we got the Nine of Needles. So this is a card of like fear and anxiety. There's clearly some big shifts that are going down right now, and I'm sure that the uncertainty is really unsettling for everyone. But that's like an underlying energy that's going on for this full moon. Then the other cards we got were Judgment. I love the artwork in this deck, how it's like Santa's checking his list twice. It's so perfect. We got Judgment, the World, the King of Candles, the Hermit, and we got the Five of Presents. So it's interesting because, this speaks to a karmic reckoning that's happening. We're making a list, we're checking it twice, we're going over, how we've behaved, and there's a judgment that's being made about that, and so this is really interesting. And then that's followed by the World, which this speaks to the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. So it's almost like we're going over the list, we're looking over our actions, and we're kind of making a judgment about that. And then it's like we're cleaning the slate and we're starting over from scratch. So it's like a really big turning point. And then interestingly, we got the King of Candles, so this is like a manifester, and this guy came out in the Christmas reading, and it's like this hot-headed, passionate person who, in the Christmas reading was maybe like aligned with something or a situation that was like based on not being in alignment with the truth, you know. I mean, we'll say a lie. And there was this like hot-headed person, and this was sort of the foundation for this like fiery, dramatic moment on Christmas, you know. So I'll put a link to that reading here because it might be relevant to whatever conflict might be arising for the... Then the next card we have is the Hermit, you know. So this is a card about taking a spiritual path, you know. I mean, sometimes when things don't go your way, I mean, really the best thing to do is like to go inward and figure out what lesson you're supposed to learn from that situation, so that you can evolve. This can also be like associated with Virgo in the zodiac, but it's interesting because we kind of had these two characters that showed up in that Christmas reading, and one was like very earthy, and one was very driven by like money, and it was almost like there was a conflict between these two sort of agendas that was going down, or that was fueling the conflict that was happening on Christmas Eve. And so it's interesting because we have these two characters. Again, it's not exactly the same characters, but one's earthly and one's super fiery, and we have this judgment that's going on where we're kind of like looking at our actions, and you know, we're making a judgment about it, and then we're like moving on, you know. So it's just sort of like interesting that that's followed by these two characters, and then we have this card of lack. You know, we've got the Five of Presents, which in the traditional deck, that's the five of Pentacles, you know. So this is a card of lack, you know, and it's a card of really around the story of like worthiness and feeling, you know, fundamentally this card is about like feeling unworthy, or like you don't have enough, or you're not enough, and this energy kind of like fueling this sense of unworthiness. So it's interesting that we have all of these sort of forces at play, you know. Like we have this sort of sense of unworthiness, we have some sort of like situation that's like maybe based on not necessarily being in alignment with the truth, that's fueling this conflict between these sort of two parties. And then we have this assessment that's happening, that's where we're gonna basically, I think the parties involved are going to accept responsibility for their role and whatever this unworthiness situation might be, and then we're going to clean the slate and we're going to start over from a new paradigm. And that's kind of the root of what's going down for this full moon, according to the Nightmare Before Christmas deck. And it's interesting because I've been doing these 3 different decks for the holiday readings, and they each have like a slightly different perspective on what's going on. And I feel like the Nightmare Before Christmas deck has been coming out with the most dramatic perspective, whereas the other ones, I think, put things in a more constructive light. So I'm going to move to the other decks and see what we got. But at the Mystical Shaman is the next deck that we're going to go with. So that's this one. And at the bottom of that, we have the Serpent. So this is a card of like Kundalini awakening, you know, and a card of like manifesting and empowerment and stepping into your power, like, and your Kundalini energy sort of like rising to the occasion, you know, being unleashed, you know. And so this can really speak to a situation of breaking through an obstacle or having a breakthrough, you know, because your energy is sort of like, it's being unleashed, and that's the underlying energy. So it's interesting that, you know, like I was saying, we have this fear and anxiety card, and we have this unleashing of power, you know, where this is a really positive perspective, and this is a not as positive perspective. It's more fear-based. But, you know, that situation of having this power being unleashed can be interpreted from both perspectives, you know. I mean, it is a dramatic and unsettling moment when that happens, you know. And that could be like how you experience the feelings of it, but like overall, it's actually a positive development. Okay, so we have the Witness, we have the Time Master, the Taming of the Wind, the Sweat Lodge, and the Wild Woman. So this is interesting because, you know, again, like if you liken this perspective to this same experience, the story that's coming through with the mystical shaman is a more positive perspective, but it could describe the same situation. So the Witness speaks to sort of having done, you know, the inner work, or having gone on this spiritual quest and sort of removed the obstacles internally, so that when you like encounter an obstacle in life, it's not so much that you're like striving and clawing to get your way, you know, but you've kind of like gone inward and done the spiritual work, so that rather than trying to force an outcome according to your will, you can actually the saying that a lot of people say is give it up to God, or give it up to the universe, and just allow things to unfold, because you've really, everything ultimately starts from within, you know. And so when you've gone on that journey and have reached that level of acceptance, you no longer have to like force and strive, you know, for an outcome, but like you can just allow. And so there's like a certain amount of grace that comes from that way of being, you know. It's sort of like this, you know, Santa's like gone down the list, he's checking it twice, he's like seeing, you know, that the lesson's been learned, you know, and so like a judgment is going to be assigned, you know. So it's almost like the work's already been done, you know. And then we have the Time Master, which, you know, this does speak to a reckoning, and it speaks to the end of a cycle. And so it's interesting that this comes right under the World, you know. It's interesting how these are lining up, you know, with the same story, but just different perspectives. So the Time Master speaks to like cycles that happen in your life. So you might have like a recurring cycle or a recurring story that's happened again and again, and it's maybe like happen in different contexts or with different people or in different places, but the story is the same. So for example, you know, with this story of having this sense of unworthiness or lack, like you might attract a similar situation where like people are taking advantage of you, or you're not getting what you deserve, or, you know, because ultimately at the root of that situation, you have to heal within yourself that sense of unworthiness. And then when you've done that work, you no longer have to strive and fight for people to, you know, give you what you deserve, but it will just happen, because you will have broken free from this cycle, which is kind of what the Time Master speaks to. It's like time isn't linear. It's like you keep learning a lesson, repeating a lesson until you learn it, and when you do, then you evolve to the next phase of life. And we have Taming the Wind. So this speaks to co-creating with the universe and manifesting. And this is sort of like the Forrest Gump story, where it's just sort of like, you know, Forrest, whenever he would reach these turning points in life, there would be this like feather that falls from the sky, and like he would like know where he was, you know, where he was supposed to go next. He would be guided through the turning point, you know. So this speaks to some guidance coming to this hot-headed King of Candles. And it's interesting because I think in the other reading where this came up, this same card came up, but the guidance was going to the other side, you know, because there was like two parties. And so it's interesting that they're both being guided, you know. And then we have the Sweat Lodge, you know, so this speaks to like healing, deep healing. And it's interesting because we're speaking of this sense of unworthiness. So that's an example of something that could be healed, you know. But this gives this sort of metaphor of like a sweat lodge where it's just like there's some toxic idea or situation or that needs to be shed, you know. And so this speaks to going deep within the Mother Earth and like sweating out this toxic behavior or this toxic pattern or this toxicity within your body, you know. And like that healing actually can be painful, it can be unpleasant, you know, but it's part of the transformation, you know. So this speaks to like shedding this idea or this pattern. And this like is interesting because you know, we have this person who's gone on this spiritual quest and they're healing something. And then underneath this sense of unworthiness, we have this transformation because, you know, this is when things like really diverge. You know, we've gone from this sense of unworthiness to this fully empowered wild woman who's like, you know, this person no longer has any blockages. You know, she's not operating from a sense of unworthiness. Like she's fully in alignment with all that is and empowered to bring forward her gifts into the world, you know. So it's interesting because we have this healing event and then we sort of like graduate, you know. We end this cycle of like unworthiness and lack, and it becomes healed and we become empowered. So that's super interesting. And again, like I did one more deck, the Urban Tarot, and it's really interesting how these are all lining up, all the stories. So okay, so I'm gonna go to the Urban Tarot last, and again, it's just like a slightly different take on the situation, but it's interesting. At the bottom, we have the Fool. So this is like taking a leap of faith into the unknown, into a new situation. It's just like stepping forward into a clean slate. And so it's interesting because I was talking about from the other two decks that we got the Judgment and the World, which is just like sort of like taking stock of where we've been, and then we're just like making amends, and we're starting into a new cycle. And you know, we start into this cycle. So it's like this interesting progression that happens, you know. We have to sort of do this end of the year sort of analysis, but then we're like jumping into a whole new fresh start here at the end. So really interesting. But when I go into the cards, I got the Star again, so this has come up a bunch. I'll get into that. Oppression, again, this has been coming up a bunch. Strife, all of these have been coming up a bunch. The Tower, and Wealth. So, I mean, these cards speak to some huge, like, shift that's happening, you know, but the Star is a card that speaks to, like, healing and wishes coming true. And it's interesting because, you know, like I said, this has been coming up a lot, but this came up interestingly in the new cold moon solar eclipse reading, which is funny because, you know, this is the full cold moon. And I said in this reading, I'm like, it's interesting because it's like we've got this, it almost has this like holiday theme to this card, even though it's not really a holiday card. I'm like, maybe this wish is going to come true for someone during the holidays. And what's interesting is that this card came through again on the Christmas Day reading, which I'll link here. And now it's coming through again. So I think that's really interesting, and it might be worthwhile to go back and look at those other readings. But, you know, we have healing and we have wishes coming true, and then we have oppression, you know. So this is like the ten of wands in the original, you know, normal deck, and this has been coming up a lot ever since the November monthly reading, which was breaking free from oppression and just talking about this oppressive situation that we're kind of trying to like move past, you know, which, I mean, I think that describes 2020 for a lot of people, you know. But this speaks to, we've been kind of like stuck in that situation all year, but all of a sudden in December, there's starting to be like movement, like we're starting to move past it. And it's interesting because the next card after that is the Five of Wands, which is the card of strife or conflict, you know, which suggests that we're starting to like break through, you know, because when you start to break through, inevitably there's going to be conflict and there's going to be resistance, because not everyone's going to be on the same page, you know. And that flows right into the Tower, which speaks to like a complete breakdown of the way things were. So, you know, whatever this was, we're finally starting to break through. You know, we're going to have to move through conflict to get there. But on the other side of that, we have the Ten of Pentacles, or the Ten of Discs, which is the card of wealth. You know, this card is super prevalent in a thread on the channel called Dynasty. I mean, this is like generational wealth. This is like stability, you know, for like a family or, you know, an empire. I mean, it's that kind of level of stability. So it's interesting because, you know, we're speaking to healing this whole situation of worthiness, and doing that is like empowering someone to like, I mean, this card falls right under these two cards. I mean, it just goes right in a row, just like this, you know, like we heal this wound, you know, in eclipse season. All the readings in eclipse season were about like this, doing this work on healing this wound. It allows us to move forward into an empowered state, and then that goes right into the wealth card. So this is like a huge shift, you know. And then when we go to the next row underneath that, we have the Queen of Pentacles underneath this star. So this is the matriarch in this deck. But this Queen of Pentacles is having some sort of healing, or, you know, having their wishes come true, and maybe around the time of the holidays. And we have the Moon, which, you know, this speaks to something unseen, or it speaks to like deep emotions, you know, or things not being as they seem. So it's like this oppression is like, you know, it's interesting also, I mentioned at the beginning of the reading that there's been this huge theme of the Seven of Swords, or the Seven of Needles coming up, which speaks to like a deception, you know, or people not being honest about how things are, you know. But this is like a situation of things not being how they necessarily seem, you know. Like this oppression might be built on something that's not exactly how it seems, you know. And whatever that cycle is, or whatever that distortion is, it's like we're finally moving past this and breaking free from this. And then we go into, this card is art in this deck, but it's like the Temperance card. I love how it's like this street art. So it's like this conflict is starting to come into balance. And it's interesting because we have this hot-headed pumpkin guy on this same row, but we also have this guidance from the universe, or, you know, which is like helping us move through this conflict, maybe towards some place of balance. And then we have the Tower. Underneath the Tower, we have this day trader, which again, this day trader has been coming up a bunch in the readings in the last month. And it was like, I mean, the message with him is he's like someone that you might need to watch out for, because it's like he might not be like a totally bad guy, but he's kind of like lost sight of sort of what's important and sort of displaced that with this materialistic gain, you know, like wanting to make money maybe at all costs, but not necessarily for the right reasons, you know. And so it's interesting because on top of this guy, we have the Tower. So this value system is kind of like breaking down, you know, like this. And it's, I did this reading for the convergence, and it's called The Big Shift. I'll link it here, but it's interesting because this came up in that reading, and it was talking about how maybe, you know, everyone has gone through this really difficult year, and there's been this sort of precedent of like business as usual, and like, you know, doing whatever it takes to like bring home the bacon, you know, and that being a value that has been supported, you know, but that changing because people who are thriving in this new energy are people who have strong communities around them. So it's like if you have to like screw people over, you know, in order to like make money, well, that value is like no longer being supported, you know, it's breaking down. And it's interesting because that falls right under the Sweat Lodge, which is this card of like healing toxicity or healing whatever this distortion is, you know, for whoever has actually gone on this spiritual quest and like really looked at that, you know, that's who's going to see this transformation. Like we're no longer valuing this materialistic sort of power, you know, I mean, not above all else, you know, that's changing. But ironically, by healing this worthiness issue and stepping into our power, we're kind of seizing the reins, taking control, and we're finding wealth that's maybe more sustainable, you know, like real true wealth, not just material wealth. So it's this is a really powerful lesson. And people talk about that a lot, just about how worthiness is like related to your self-worth. I mean, your self-worth and abundance are related, you know. If even if you make money and you don't feel worthy of it, you won't hang on to it. You know, it's deeper than that. It's like a spiritual thing. And this whole reading kind of speaks to that phenomenon. So I'm going to grab my moon cards because it's a full moon reading. Okay, just a couple cards from, I'm going to take Moonology. Oh my gosh. Okay, so at the bottom, I'm just going to take this card at the bottom. Be bold and make the first move. I mean, I think that's like an outward display of worthiness, being bold and making the first move. So that's the message from Moonology. I'm going to go to Queen of the Moon Oracle to pick a couple cards to end this reading, but you know, it looks like we're really going out of 2020 with a bang. You know, it's been a really hard year, and we've learned some tough lessons, but it looks like there's some evolution that's coming from that. And it's weird because, you know, like I said, we've been really kind of in quicksand all year, and now all of a sudden things are starting to shift in a big way at the end of the year, which is really exciting. I'm excited because after this I'm going to start doing the, you know, the New Year's readings, but just, I have a thread, which is at the end of this video for 2020, and it kind of, it's like a highlight reel for 2020, but this has been really a huge year for just change. Okay, this is really interesting. Again, we've got this matching thing going on, but we've got the Waxing Gibbous 3, which is a card of boundaries. It's interesting how this goes on. And so I think this is really interesting because, I mean, one of the huge lessons of worthiness and self-worth is having proper boundaries. And this boundary message came through in a reading I just did about, you know, just healing like codependence and like unhealthy patterns by having healthy boundaries. And this is like a huge lesson that goes hand in hand with worthiness, because often when people don't have a strong sense of self-worth, they don't have healthy boundaries with other people, and that leads to like toxic patterns. And this is a huge message that goes with that. And then we have waxing gibbous 5, which is resilience. You know, I think this is for sure a message we've all had to walk through with, you know, in 2020, and it's made us all stronger. But that's all leading to, this is so beautiful, this beautiful climax at the end of the year, the Queen of the Moon, which is sovereignty. It's so cool. I mean, this is basically the same message as the Wild Woman. It's like stepping into your power, owning your power, and like moving forward towards your destiny in your full light and power. I mean, what a way to go out of the year. That is such a beautiful message. So, I mean, I'm just going to leave it there. There's like not much else to say. And we'll be back soon with more New Year's messages.